I think we're live.
Close. Yes, you are.
There's nobody.
Your face is on.
Your face is on.
All right, so Mark chapter 14, verses 32 through 42, if anyone would like to read. And this is what version?
This is the New Living Translation.
Okay.
They went to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and Jesus said, "Sit here while I go and pray." He took Peter, James, and John with him, and he became deeply troubled and distressed. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." He went on a little farther and fell to the ground. He prayed that, if it were possible, the awful hour awaiting him might pass him by. "Abba, Father," he cried out, "everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Then he returned and found the disciples asleep. He said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray, so that you will not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak." Then Jesus left them again and prayed the same prayer as before. When he returned to them again, he found them sleeping, for they could not keep their eyes open, and they didn't know what to say. When he returned to them a third time, he said, "Go ahead and sleep, have your rest. But no, the time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up, let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here."
So there are many things to talk about from this passage. I think the thing that stood out to me this time around when I've read this, obviously it's a story most of us have heard if we've been at church at all during Easter tide, is that it says Jesus prayed, saying the same word several times. So at least 3 times Jesus prays to God in some form or fashion, and recorded in Mark it says, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible, remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." This story also shows up in Matthew and Luke, and so I wanted to read both of those as well. So let's look up Matthew 26, chapter 26. That can be found in your New Testament. And those are verses 36 through 46.
Okay. So then, and I'm reading the New International Version. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watching." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken, yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Did you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he came back, he found them sleeping, or he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer."
So in both accounts, in Mark and Matthew, Jesus prays this semblance or variation of the same prayer we read in Mark. I guess it stood out to me because, I don't know, I guess I always just think about, like, when people talk about the story that he prayed it once and the disciples fell asleep and then Judas shows up. I don't think about it being this continual thing that he does over and over. All right, so the last one is, you can find the story in Luke chapter 22. And this is the short version, the condensed. And it starts with verse 39 and ends with verse 46. If anyone would like to read.
39 through what?
46.
Okay.
This is the easy to read version.
I've never heard of that version.
It's literally listed easy to read version.
I
39 through 46. Okay. Jesus left the city and went to the Mount of Olives. Oh, wait, hold on. Wrong slide. Jesus said to them, "But now, if you have money or a bag, carry that with you, and if you don't have a sword, sell your coat and buy one." Am I right?
No.
What did you say?
That's the
39.
You were right the first
Luke,
time.
Luke 22.
39.
Wait,
Somebody read it.
I got you.
Not easy to read version.
it's so condensed that it's like
All the stories of that.
Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose from prayer and went back to the disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." So tonight I wanted to focus on that specific prayer that we find Jesus praying in Mark and in Matthew and Luke. In Mark 14, verse 36, it says, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but you." In Matthew 26, there's two variations of it, 39 and then verse 42. "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." And then, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be." And then finally in Luke 22, verse 42, it says, "Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." So what I wanted to do is just kind of take sections of the prayer and just kind of talk a little bit about the questions that Jesus is asking in this. So the first thing that Jesus says in these variations is, Jesus prays, "All things are possible" in Mark. And then in Matthew, he says, "If it is possible." And then in Luke, we find, "If you're willing." So Jesus says three distinct things at the beginning of his prayer. Taking a moment to think about that, I think it's a question to ask about what do we think about God's providence, or another way to put it is, are all things possible with God? Or is God limited in some way? Or is God self-limiting? Would be another way. So, can God do anything, everything God wants? Does God choose not to do things, or can God only do so much? So that's the question I wanted to explore with you guys. So, what part of the camp do you fall in on? When you think of God, is God capable of doing all things and everything? Are all things possible with God? Or is God actually limited in the things that God can do? Or is God not limited? God just chooses to be limited or self-limited. So where would you fall when you think about that question?
My initial reaction is the last one. I'm with the last one, because like we have free will, so he doesn't step in and do things, and if so, what was kind of the point of us being there? We just be with God and
yeah, the whole original sin thing too. Like as humans, I guess because we sin and fell from grace and whatever. Like suffering is a part of life, like it was for Adam and Eve, like all that stuff. So I don't know. Yeah, I seem to agree with that too.
Anybody else?
I kind of go back and forth between the first one and the last one. I mean, yeah, I think he does do anything, and I don't know, it's confusing in my mind. I try not to think about it.
Yeah.
Like, I always get to the point where what's the reasoning behind what God chooses to do and not do? And that makes me mad sometimes. Either you're frustrated just trying to figure it out, or if it's not what I want, then dealing with that. So
I guess a follow-up question, if we're just thinking about it in the context of Jesus' prayers and finding variations of it within 3 different Gospels, what do you think Jesus thought?
because I think because he prays that, and then everybody always mocks, from the criminals on the cross, or if your God can do anything, why doesn't he come and take you down from this, and why are you having to suffer through this? And so I think Jesus believed and knew that God could do anything, but chooses what to do.
See, I see it as Jesus is God on earth, so he wasn't really praying, oh, let me not do this. It's more of him thinking out loud and preparing himself to be on the cross. Just kind of.
I think it's just kind of another, it's not really related, but it's just another moment of or I guess another point in the Bible where it's very true, evident that Jesus is human, he has these emotions that he doesn't understand, that he doesn't experience that pain. And the interesting thing too is I've heard that part of Luke, I'm sure you know about this, but it's in my Bible it says those 43 and 44 in Luke are omitted because it says an angel comes down and strengthens him.
Sure.
And then and then his sweat was drops of blood falling to the ground. But it's people didn't like to see that he, even since he's Jesus, he needed that extra help. Did you heard that, or am I just making that up? I feel like I've heard that before. I don't know. But anyway, so I always think that's interesting, that aspect. And he feels but he knows that it has to happen.
All right. The second aspect of his prayer, he goes on to say in Mark, all things are possible with you, God. Remove this cup. And then in Matthew, he says, may this cup be taken from me. And then in Luke, he says, take this cup. So, tagging it along with what he said at the beginning, so in the first one, Mark, he says, all things are possible to you. Remove this cup from me. In Matthew, he says, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. And then in Luke, Jesus says, if you're willing, take this cup. Which I think are 3 different things, or at least they sound different in connotation or how they're put. So the question is, what is Jesus' cup referring to?
His burden. The word out of the mouth. Burden. The burden of, original sin, the sin of all man. I don't know what made me think of this, but, just you kind of reiterating, the 3 different things that he said. I almost wonder if that kind of sheds light on what the authors believed, in terms of what they thought Jesus, would have said, or what they thought they remember him saying, or that kind of thing. Kind of lends itself to maybe their theological views.
Well, I definitely think so, because it says the eyewitnesses were asleep. So,
This story goes on.
so obviously, unless there was a 4th dude that snuck in there, jacked up on Mountain Dew, listening in.
Well, it's Mark is always he's they think he's the guy who runs away from some scenes. So he's acts like he's in the background. It always makes me feel that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it has something to do with the communities historians that compiled these stories orally and then jotted them down. But as far as, I think it's, it's one of those things where, okay, we could say it's the burden of original sin and stuff like that. But there's other scholars and people like that take it and say, okay, well, it was about his past. Some people say it was about his present affliction, and then lots of people say it was this foreshadowing of him realizing what was about to take place, and that's what was the real burden. It wasn't necessarily his present circumstance, but it was the circumstances he was headed into. So you get those from all types of different scholars. It's not like everybody is in agreement what the cup is.
Was there a physical? I mean, is it documented there was a physical cup there?
I doubt it.
Or was it like
Doubt it.
metaphor?
Take this cup from me.
It's
It was,
too heavy.
it was the Holy Grail.
That's what I'm saying. Could it be so? Could it have been the girl?
We'll never know.
There's no indication. I've never read anything people saying that was an actual cup or anything.
Okay.
Though I'm not poo-pooing the idea, because right before this story he does do the Lord's Supper with them. So maybe he stole the cup from the upper room and took it with him.
So I mean, that's what I'm inferring.
Maybe he had a little cup of juice with him when he went out there. He thought he might get thirsty, so he had out there. He had with him a little cup, and he was like, "Oh, this makes sense." But I mean, is it really a physical cup? I doubt that that's what he's referring to, but metaphorically, it could have been there. As a representation. All right, so with that idea, Inlot had said he felt like the cup was this idea of original sin and this burden that was placed upon him. Does anybody have any other thoughts about the cup? What is Jesus referring to? James said it could be his gin and juice.
Oh, that's not what I was getting at.
No.
My conspiracy theory was the same cup from
Yeah, from the supper. I got you.
the upper room.
Yeah, I like that idea. I've never read that. That sounds like a Dan Brown kind of.
That's the Dr. Jones coming out.
Yeah.
That's my Lee Anderson coming out. Where's the cup?
So you were talking about the foreshadowing of, like, the cup being a metaphor for foreshadowing of things to come, like on the like death on the cross.
Well, all of that, would be foreshadowing, like him being arrested, because that happens just then, and being beaten and mocked and then crucified.
Right. Well, I mean, in my mind, all that is part of the burden of original sin. I mean, that's just how I see it. Like, I mean, it's all a process. So.
No, I was thinking of all of it, like the arrest, the beating, the trial, the cross, holding all the sins in the world, like just the whole experience.
I don't know.
Sure, it works. The third section. So you have this: all things are possible. Remove this cup. Take this cup. May it be taken from me. But Jesus says, not what I want, not as I will, and not my will. So what do you think Jesus wanted or desired?
I don't think anyone, like Morgan was saying, this is kind of, well, you can definitely read this as a very human moment in Jesus' life, where he doesn't really want to do what he knows is coming, because it's going to suck. It's going to be very painful and all of that. So I think that's like natural. Like if there's a task that has to be done, and you want to know, even if the task will still be completed, if there's a different way to do it that does not require me to be arrested, put on trial in front of people, questioned, beaten, have swords stuck in my side, all that stuff. Would probably be preferable than like an alternative would be preferable. So
Sword and side thing that happened once, so that's the very end, just to be sure.
Maybe.
Right.
So, hello. Thank you.
Peter, we're having Bible study. Go outside.
Yes, yes, I am Amy.
Any other thoughts? What do you think Jesus wanted or desired?
I kind of like that idea that you were talking about of, you know, kind of like the whole mortality, you know, him showing his own mortality. It's almost like he was, I don't know, not negotiating with God, but maybe kind of, you know, it's like, well, you know, could we maybe do this over here instead of, you know, getting beaten, tortured, and killed on a cross? I think that's interesting. Kind of builds a case that he was, you know, fully human and fully divine. Kind of brings that home.
If you go with what Carly mentioned earlier, though, it would seem like that it's not an actual debate or an actual question. It is a motivating factor in some ways.
Yeah, I don't know.
reminding himself why he's there.
I guess taking this out of Jesus' world and placing it in our world, what's your want or will for yourself? And does it change due to circumstances? Do you think what Jesus wanted and desired was the same days earlier as to it was when he was on his knees in Gethsemane? Do you think his will or his wants or his desires were different?
Say that one more time.
Thinking about yourself, like put yourself in Jesus' place for a second. Depending on your circumstances, does what you want or what you desire change? Or is it consistent? Do you think what Jesus wanted, take yourself out of it now, thinking about Jesus, do you think what Jesus wanted and desired was the same days earlier as it was in that moment?
I think maybe the end result was, the end goal was still the same, but the way by which you get there could have changed. I mean, just like, you know, for any of us, for me, my thoughts change depending on my circumstances, you know, but it doesn't mean that my end goal is different. It's just, you know, how I get there depending on where I am in my life.
Maybe it's just him getting nervous. He's known the whole time that he's going to go to the cross, but it's getting closer, and so he's worrying about it more, getting nervous that it's actually about to happen. And I think, we're the same way. It might be something really good that's going to happen, but it's a big change in your life, and you're so gung-ho about it that like a few days before you get nervous and scared because it is a big change. So.
Did we know he was going to? I've read that some instances that Jesus knew in the end that he would die for everything. But did he know? I don't know if it was a document he knew like he was going to be crucified.
Well, luckily he gave me a phone call.
Is it documented in like the Bible? Is it like somewhere where it's like
This
You know,
is the moment when Jesus.
but because if you know, in a certain point you're gonna die for this.
Has it been interpreted that way?
Yeah.
Yes.
That he knew.
Has it been interpreted other ways?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's a big difference, if somebody says you're gonna die for the sins of man, but it's gonna be in your sleep. Okay, good go. Night. But if you're gonna toe the cross, get beaten, that may be a little different
I'll
situation.
be honest, if somebody told me I was dying,
Period.
period,
Be a little
I would be
nervous.
troubled by it, regardless if I knew.
Yeah.
Regardless if it was being beaten or shot or drowned or I would still have anxiety. I'd probably be like Christmas morning. I couldn't fall asleep when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I was sitting there the whole time, trying not to fall asleep. I don't know. But I think for what I was trying to say is for instance, what Hannah had said is that what he wanted or desired was not to die. Days earlier, was that still the immediate want or desire of Christ?
Or if he was more focused on the end goal, or wanted pizza for dinner.
Was he focused on, I'm with my friends, the disciples, and I want to pour into them something? What, was his circumstance the thing that changed his want, his desire, or was that always the want, desire? And so now it's come to head, and now it's got to.
But what I just, in my mind, I just wonder if death was always in the picture, because to me, he came to Earth to save the world, to save everyone. So, is that by dying on a cross? Is that by becoming king of the world? What by what means is that? So, I don't know. In my mind, the end goal is to save the world. The end goal or the end result was not just to die.
Sure.
I don't know. If that makes any sense.
Didn't he keep telling the disciples beforehand, or seeing what's gonna happen? Last Supper and everything. So.
Well, I don't.
Well, I would
He
say
said,
scholars would argue that Jesus, and I'm saying that what Matthew just said, scholars would say too. So I don't want to be like, oh yeah, people don't say what Matthew says, but that's not true at all. But other people would argue that when Jesus is telling his disciples about him being the blood of the new covenant and stuff like that, isn't necessarily this idea of Jesus was born to die, but it was because of the way Jesus lived, it was inevitable he would die. You live this way in this world,
Yeah, I can see that.
you're going to face those consequences. Not Jesus, his sole purpose or his birth into the world was he was going to die. It was destined for him to die. It was more of, because of the way he lived, it was inevitable.
Because he lived in the road.
So that would be another argument against, or pushback on that. So there's tons of ways of looking at it, 2,000 years of looking at it. So it's more of just thinking about it for ourselves in this moment. And the last part of this section of the prayer is Jesus goes from what I want, not as I will, not my will, to what you want, as you will, yours or your will be done. So what do you think God wanted or willed for Jesus?
I'm sure God, I don't know, if Jesus was his son, it was not easy for him to see this happen. He cared, there's so many times about this is my son whom I love. There's no, but he, I don't know, again, he knew this was his plan for this to happen. So, yeah.
Sure, God loved there was an easier way for us to believe, and for him not to have to go those lengths to prove his love to us. think he knew that we were stubborn. And that takes killing his own son to show that he would sacrifice anything for us.
And I don't know, your point, it's like it sends a message, it's like this, we have to give up our lives for him, comparing that in some ways, like to fully be, I don't know, that's kind of like an example, because like you said, we're like selfish by ourselves, but if we see it, this is a sacrifice we have to make to fully be with God, I don't know, it's tough like that.
If you come from it from the perspective of Jesus was born to die, Jesus had to die for all of this to take place, for Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit to become one, and for us to be reconciled. There was some debt that had to be paid. Jesus was the payment, and he had to die for us to live. Then what God wanted or willed for Jesus was for Jesus to die. Or you could look at it from a different perspective and say that Jesus was entered into the world as a representative of God. In fact, beyond that, it was God made flesh. So in this moment, though Jesus is distracted by his grief, Jesus is not separate from God. So this is God's conversation. Yeah. And, you know, did God will for God's self to die?
And it helped us, popped into my head, was how much, if Jesus was fully human, and we believe that as humans we have free will, how much free will did Jesus have? And if he had any, was that separate from God, since God and Jesus are fully together?
I think the question alone kind of begs, or kind of says to me that free will could have been exercised. And I think that that's one of the things that historical Christianity has always tried to propose, is that Jesus did not have to die. He chose willingly to do what he did, as opposed to being forced by God with like a full Nelson, and God is the bully in the sky that, you know, gave Jesus the swirly and made, you know, Jesus do all this stuff. It was Jesus's heart and passion to do what was right and to change the trajectory of the world, and he willingly gave his life up to change it. So I think there's obviously like a lot of different ways of looking at this, and historically you could, you know, we could spend years talking about this moment in Jesus's life, because this theologically has a lot of underpinnings about what we think about God, what we think about Christianity, what we think the faith is built on or based on, or stuff like that. There's a whole lot of nuances that you could get into and talk about as far as it goes. And I guess for me, you know, I was thinking about that last little bit of it, about God's will, and, you know, we talk a lot about that. You know, death is one time that people tend to bring it up. You know, we bring it up in circumstances of, you know, trying to make life decisions and trying to figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to live and where we're going to live and stuff like that. So, you know, maybe not being able to sit here and decide what we think God's will was for Jesus in that moment, it's probably pretty difficult for us to answer the question, what do you think God wills or wants for you? That's probably not the easiest question to wrap our minds around.
It's not any specific. I think general goodness. I think I would be able to say that I think that's what God wishes for everybody in the world, not just me specifically, and not in any specific form. But.
And just to just to be a devil's advocate, then if that's the case, then when we say God's will for Jesus was for him to die, that's a good thing. And so that could also be God's will for us, because that could be a good thing. I'm not to say that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that you can infer that. You can take that into consideration. Well, we're not going to answer all these questions.
Well, I think in death comes inspiration.
It can, for sure.
So
It's definitely a motivating factor for some, to change their life or to do something. Or it's also a downward spiral. Got to change. I was reading this article, and it wasn't in Relevant magazine, but it was an article in Relevant magazine. I just happened to see it online. And it was about Christians, younger Christians, and big questions. And it said that studies show that one of the factors of young people leaving faith and never kind of returning back is due to this lack of being able to ask big questions. Just as Jesus, we all have these kind of deeply rooted questions that sit within us. They tend to rise up in us from time to time. They are the ones that seem to avoid any kind of satisfying answer. Those are the exact questions I want us to explore together. I want us to explore big questions. In the story we just read, Jesus doesn't get an answer and then move forward. We seem to think that that is the logical way of us being able to move forward in our life, is that we have this conundrum, we have this difficulty, we have this thing, and until we find an answer to it, we're stuck. But that's not how Jesus does. And in this context, he faces his deepest question, which is, can this cup be taken from me? Whatever we think it means. It obviously meant a lot to Jesus. The story tells us he was grieved to the point of death, that his sweat were like drops of blood, which to me just means they're heavy. He wasn't just like having a light jog. This was a difficult thing for him to face. One that probably was sitting with him for a time. Whether or not that was when he was a little boy, little baby infant Jesus, as I like to point out, was he wrestling with this question then? Or did this question come into him later in life? Regardless of that, Jesus faces his deepest question about this cup. And despite an answer, he continues to move forward. There is no answer in this story. It's not like we get this revelation from God. We get this point in Luke where it says an angel comes to strengthen him. But it still says that he's scared out of his mind and sweat is like drops of blood. That's after the fact. So whatever strength this angel supposedly gave him did not answer and soothe Jesus' mind. In fact, it comes to the point where Jesus comes out of wherever he was and he looks at these people that he brought with him to pray for him, and they're asleep and he is angry at them. If he wasn't still worried about it, why would he be upset at them? So to me, this story is a perfect way of looking at our biggest questions, our deepest questions. I don't think it's in the answers we move forward. I don't think it's in the answers that we move beyond where our faith is right now to a deeper faith. I think that momentum comes in just facing our biggest questions. Whatever those are, owning up to them and exploring them and facing them. Besides, answers, they always lie on the other side of questions anyway. So if you don't ask the question, you're not going to see answers to it. I can't think of a better place for us to do that than together. I mean, what is the point of us getting together if we can't ask our biggest questions? I hope that, unlike this story, we won't fall asleep on each other. Carly sharing some deep, long question. I'm over here. But what I really mean by that is that when we do explore our deepest questions, that we explore it together. That it's not Hannah's on an island with her deep question, and we're all over here, got it figured out. You know, or I've got some deep question, and half of you are with me, and half of you aren't. It means we're all in this together. So maybe removing a little bit of our surface level sometimes and becoming a bit more vulnerable in our time together. I want to ask those deep-rooted questions with us. And they can literally be about anything. They could even be things that you think or things that you don't think, that you just kind of want to put out on the table. So things that mean something to you that you feel like people don't pay enough attention to, or it could be something that you don't think that it seems like everybody else thinks, and you want to put that on the table. I hesitate to list things because I don't want you to limit yourself in your thinking, because anything that we say, any kind of question that we ask together, any kind of thing that we explore has faith elements to it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, well, what is God? You know, like, if that is your question, that is your question. But what I'm saying is, it could also be like, what the hell am I doing with my life? That could be a question. So anyway, thinking about that article and thinking about our time together, I thought it would be a good use of our time to try to explore those together, and sure that Scripture would be nice to have as a reference point. Our collective wisdom would be a good reference point, or someone else's collective wisdom that we might seek. So anyway, take this week, seek your questions, write them down, and bring them. So that's what we're going to be doing for the next little while. Kind of like what we did with the cultural exegesis thing. So this will go as well as we put time into it. If we don't bring things to the study, then it will be an awfully short study. I have a feeling, though, there are questions that you all have. Things that stick with you, things that you don't really have your mind wrapped around, and that would be helpful for all of us to hear and for us to talk about. So that's where we're going to start. Cool. Any questions?
Any questions?
Any big questions?
Any little questions?
And if you do think of something before next week, send those to me. That way I can start making this into some sort of study.
Why is cake so rich?
I'm not going to bring in answers or something. Answer.com, hopefully.
We'll ask cheese.
It is B-Ray's birthday, so I feel like we should sing B-Ray happy birthday. We should have cake and ice cream, but before we do that, anything that we should pray about this week?
The Harrison family.
I think we should pray for each other in response to that, because I think it's all pretty hard.
In all of the communities that these are from.
Pray that B-Ray has a good 36th year of life.
Pray for resolution. Just a period of resolution.
I was pointing hard. Sorry, I don't normally point at people when they
You got pray.
I feel like someone in this room. I sense it in my heart.
That's my sister called me tonight to wish me happy birthday. That's
That was
awesome.
nice.
How's Celia doing?
She's doing well. They sang twice tonight to me, twice. Once.
Anybody else? If everybody's in agreement, I think we'll let Harden pray for us tonight.
Who me? Oh, all right. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for all of us to get together. We lift up the experiment class as you do. And let's have a great weekend. And in your precious heavenly name, amen.
Amen. Yes. Put that cake out.
We just need to make a recording of that.
Yeah, man.
We did just make a recording of that.
Oh, we did.
And I just want to thank everybody online for joining us.
Yeah.
So many of you tonight, just overwhelming.
We could put a beat to that and remix it. It could be the podcast
Oh, yeah.
intro.
Oh yes, that's exactly what that should be. Exactly.
Anybody want like candles tonight?
Do you have candles?
Oh, yes, I do.
It's
Oh,
about
yes,
three.
we would like candles. But you hit stop on that.
Yes, I do have candles.
You can
Amazing.
No.